All right, something people ask us a lot is where are you going to be removed from the city, like properly away from the city, out in the suburbs or even out in the country, or where can you live where you're going to be close in enough to Portland to either be in the city, be in a dense urban area, or be close enough to drive in to get into the city, either, commuting daily or from time to time for entertainment, whatever it may be. Now, there's going to be layers to it, but there is a pretty clear cut and dry distinction of, being close in or not. So obviously you could be 45 minutes away from the city, or you could be 20 minutes, 25 minutes. We're talking about areas that are going to be about 15 minutes or less into Portland, into the city, and also areas that have little neighborhoods, little pockets of entertainment areas, in particular on the east side of the river. But we're going to talk about all that. So if this is something you've been wondering, looking at your home search, looking at where to live in Portland, stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Paul Clem with the Oregon Relocation Team coming to you from Portland, Oregon. And in this video, again, we're going to look at some clear boundaries for where you would need to live to feel like you're really living in Portland. Portland and the metro area are pretty sprawled in every direction. You can go west all the way out to Hillsborough. You can go east all the way out to Gresham. You can go south down to Wilsonville or north up into Vancouver and even a little bit north of Vancouver up into Washington. So the metro area, again, it's really spread out. It's really sprawled. And there's going to be areas where you live, closer proximity to the city that where you're going to feel a little bit more of a connection to Portland as opposed to really being out in suburbia or even, touching the urban growth boundary and feeling like you are kind of small town living or almost out to the country. So this is going to be a pretty simple video, kind of a frequently asked question style. Again, this is something we get asked about a lot. I think some people don't really care necessarily where they're going to live. And a lot of people moving here to the area from out of state, they're not tied to an area outside of maybe where their work is going to be and where they're going to need to be commuting to. But otherwise, most people tend to fall in the camp of either they don't want to be near the city or in the city, or they want to be close enough to Portland or in Portland to be able to enjoy some of the activities that a bigger city offers. So we're going to look at a map. I created a couple of boundaries. There's like I mentioned, a pretty clear distinction as far as where you would need to be to feel close in or a little bit further out. But there's two perspectives of this, and it does really vary based on which side of the river you're on. So let's take a look. But before we do that, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. And we've helped so many people relocate to Portland and move to the Portland metro area. And as real estate professionals, we love to help with that process. So if that's you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk all about it. Okay, I'm down here now, and we're going to look at a couple of different boundaries. We're going to look at this from a couple of different perspectives, but again, really the point I want to get across is ultimately where you would need to live to feel like, again, you're closer into Portland. Obviously, within a certain kind of radius, you're going to feel like you're in the city. But on the outskirts, really in every direction, where would you need to live to feel that connection to Portland and to be able to, drop down into the city or up or over or whatever into the city in 10, 15 minutes? And where does that line exist? So I want to look first at this boundary we're looking at right here that shows, I think, what most people would consider areas that are quote unquote close in. Now, there's a really big boundary here in Portland in the West Hills. So you can see Forest Park, all this, this big forest here. This is all Forest Park, hiking trails. You've probably heard of it. It's really cool. But these West Hills, these hills here create this natural barrier or boundary separating downtown, which is on the west side of the river, And then all of the east side of the river from a lot of this over here on the west side, which is primarily Beaverton and Hillsborough going due west. But then down south, you have Tigard and Tualatin, Wilsonville, Sherwood, a little bit further south down here. So obviously, the further out south or west here, you're going to be properly out in the suburbs, kind of no matter what. But you can see this first boundary we're looking at that's highlighted in white. If you see that in relation to where the river is, there's a lot more going on the east side of the river than there is on the west side of the river. And a big part of that is the West Hills here, again, because you have that natural barrier. And so we're going to look at another boundary here, which is just putting downtown Portland, putting a pin in the map, right? Using downtown Portland as kind of the center of the map and an equal distance in every direction. So that's more of a truer perspective of, being close in or not. But again, when you look at this boundary, that's kind of factoring in or accounting for the West Hills here. So we're going to talk about this one first. And if you look at, again, where the city is here, and I wish this was a little brighter, but hopefully you can still see that to some degree where it says Portland, right? This is the downtown area on the west side of the river. You have some industrial areas close in on the east side of the river, kind of within 12 blocks, and then the Lloyd district here, all more or less part of the skyline of Portland. But this is a pretty good representation of the fact that most people would consider being close in. You could be further east and be quote unquote close in, but on the west side, once you get up and over the hills, you can't see the city. It's laid out completely different. It starts to feel more suburban very quickly. So you don't have to go too far on the west side to where the dynamic completely shifts and completely changes. And we're going to talk more about that. But Portland is a city of neighborhoods, and of course you have the urban center, the downtown area, downtown Portland, the Pearl District, and then Northwest 23rd, Nob Hill. This area is a little more neighborhoody, but connected to the city, so kind of an uptown, type feel. And then also on the west side, you have South Waterfront, the infamous South Waterfront, where you have a lot of newer high-rise buildings, condos, OHSU. But that's going to make up, kind of the true urban area. On the east side of the river, well, here I should take a step back, and that boundary on the west side, really just kind of extends, just up the hill to kind of what you can see from this close in area. Once you crest the hill and get up over the backside, again, it's going to feel quite a bit different. A couple neighborhoods in Southwest Portland feel removed from the city. You're definitely, removed from kind of the feeling of a lot of these east side neighborhoods. It's a little more mid-century. It's a little more, kind of quasi suburban, but older for the most part in Southwest here. But you have a couple little neighborhood centers like Hillsdale and Multnomah Village right here, Barber Boulevard, kind of a dense, busy corridor running through Southwest Portland. So, you can see if you're in Southwest Portland here, you do have a couple of these, little neighborhood areas, districts that, kind of cater to what somebody might look for in some of the east side neighborhoods that we'll talk about. And you have this close proximity to Barber Boulevard and I-5, which run up into, into the city, into downtown, or getting over to the east side. And so from Southwest down here, because of the access alone, you can get up into the city in like 10 minutes, and you can get over to, pretty much anywhere on the east side in maybe 15 minutes. So, there's a lot of relative convenience in terms of feeling like you're close in, even though it has a different feeling as far as the area goes, being in Southwest Portland. Again, the West Hills here, if you lived over here, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but going up and over the West Hills, it's, a little more cumbersome, adds on, 5+ minutes to the drive. And it just, you feel that much more removed because you don't have the access to I-5. So on the east side of the river, this is where all of the, kind of urban neighborhood, residential, type areas are down in Selwood and along Southeast Division and Southeast Hawthorne and East Burnside, Laurelhurst, really popular neighborhood. A lot of these Northeast Portland neighborhoods, Irvington, very popular, Alameda, Grant Park. You can see you have kind of the main streets running through these areas that have restaurants and coffee shops and things like that, but very residential in here. So, it's a really unique mix and dynamic in these areas as far as really, I mean, like you can see here on a map, being close into the city, and having some of those more urban amenities, um, compared to, being out in the suburbs, but not necessarily living in an area where you have like, high-rise buildings and everything like that. So I think this area, this boundary, I mean, in terms of what people would consider to feel like you're close in, quote unquote, extends up to North Portland and St. John's, Cathedral Park, this area. It is a little removed up here, but just the feeling and the dynamic that you have here is on par with if you lived, over here on Hawthorne, for example, or down off of Division, for example. So again, this outline here, this map, when I do a home search for people who are looking to be close into the city, have more of kind of the Portland experience, living in some of these really cool Portland neighborhoods, uh, this is the boundary that I'm typically drawing, more or less. So if you want to be close into the city and really feel like you're living in Portland in an environment that leans a little more urban, even if it's primarily residential, it's going to be within this boundary. Now, if we look at this from another perspective, I think there are some sweet spots, in particular on the west side. When you look at this just square area, putting a pin in the map and looking kind of equidistant north, south, east, west in not necessarily what would feel like you're close in all cases, but quite literally, you are kind of within these boundaries that give you still really good access to getting into the city. And where, you're getting a lot more on the west side, than you can see on the east side. This first boundary we looked at already kind of makes up a lot of this one, but it's something like 80 blocks. I think so. On the east side, it's very cut and dry, because I mean, you can see this is all laid out on a grid. I mean, outside of like Mount Tabor and Laurelhurst, you can see these cool windy streets. I mean, these are definitely one-offs, but most of the east side is very laid out on a grid. It's very kind of predictable driving around in terms of what you get. And on the west side, there's all these hills and windy streets, and you can really kind of get lost. So it's relatively flat on the east side. It just, everything kind of naturally extends east. You go further and further east, until you get about to 82nd, which is probably, honestly, probably the boundary that most people would think of. If you're inside 82nd, between 82nd and the river, you're like properly close in to the city. I did I-205 as a boundary here because you can be, if 82nd's the boundary and you're inside 205 on, 91st, 92nd, let's say, you're just that much farther, which is not much, just a handful of blocks from being on kind of, I think, what most people would consider to be that boundary on the east side. This top corner up here, a lot of it is going to be industrial. I mean, you start to get out to the airport, right? So not a lot of people living up here in this area so don't really need to account for this top corner. This original boundary is taking all of that into account, up here in these Northeast Portland neighborhoods. Now, interestingly enough, again, because of the dynamic you get in North Portland all the way up here in St. John's, I think most people would consider this to be close in. Just as far as again the feel and the dynamic that you get up here in these areas, but if we're using the truest boundary for being close in, quote unquote close in, being about 80, 90 blocks east, that same distance from the center of the map being the city going north, you can actually see, okay, St. John's, this area it's a little bit removed. I mean, depending on the time of day and the exact route that you'd take, to get where you're going somewhere toward, the center, say into downtown, it can be a 20-minute drive. So that is something to take into account. That is something that sometimes would lead somebody to not end up pursuing St. John's, or they would kind of take it off their list because again, you really get a cool urban residential feel up there, cool restaurants and shops and things like that, but it is a little bit far. Now, again, on the west side of the river is where you get most of the variation here because of the West Hills. So you can be on the west side and 23rd, 25th, you can see some of the you can see some of this grid type area does extend I don't know, 30 blocks, yeah, 29th. You can kind of stay in the numbers, 34th. Okay, call it 34 blocks west compared to 80 or 90 blocks east. But then, at least in Northwest here, you're up into Forest Park. You're up into like a forest, and you're going for a hike, and you certainly don't feel like you're close into the city. And there's not like houses or neighborhoods through here where the park is. So you pop through the other side of the park, and you get to like Forest Heights, this area, which is going to be more like maybe 90, 100 blocks west. Still Portland. The Portland boundary is right about here. So there are plenty of areas in Portland in the city limits that aren't in this close in boundary. And Portland itself, the boundary is only about 100 blocks west compared to almost a couple hundred blocks going east. So this is all still Portland over here. We call it East County before you get out to Gresham. But again, you pass I-205 on the east side, you don't feel like you're close in over here. You get a different feel, a different dynamic, different offerings. You don't have like all the breweries and fine dining and kind of the Portland eclectic culture, as much once you get further out east here. Very much true on the west side here too, where like Northwest Heights, Forest Heights, this area up in the West Hills, it's going to feel very, very suburban, kind of nice, upscale. I mean, most of the homes are like 3,500 square feet plus. So, you know, very different feel compared to anything else you can get in Portland, really, up here in Northwest Heights. And then on the west side of the river here, too, this line is basically mirroring the county line, where over here, Multnomah County, where Portland is, over here on the west side, you're into Beaverton and into Washington County. So there are these neighborhoods, West Slope, Raleigh Hills, Garden Home, that are, you can see they're just right on the line, as far as what you would consider close in. I think anybody living in West Slope, living in Raleigh Hills, living in Garden Home, inside of 217, I mean, if you're past 217 west into Beaverton proper, you're definitely like out into Beaverton. Now, I think people living in this corridor, that's actually unincorporated Washington County, I don't think anyone would say they are close in. Although, again, I mean, if you look on the east side, I think anybody living on this boundary here would say, they're relatively close in. It's just a completely different feel and a completely different dynamic here, but your access into the city is still great. So you're kind of out in this other world over here, but still can get into Portland in about 15 minutes, or less in some cases, out on this kind of county line border, in this corridor in here. And this is a really nice, desirable area that a lot of people do tend to gravitate toward. So that's part of why I'm highlighting it here, where you're just over the county line. You get better property taxes. You have cool old historic architecture, really well established, mature neighborhoods. But again, it doesn't feel really by any stretch that you are like in an area that has any type of like urban residential mix, whereas that's probably the biggest criteria for saying I'm close in to Portland is having kind of that mix of like walkability and good restaurants and things like that, which again is going to be more, inside of this border. Anybody living inside of this border is going to, I think, mostly have that experience. And then there's this buffer zone too. So we're talking about kind of just on the outskirt on the west side, but there's this buffer zone here where the West Hills creates the boundary. And then, you're about 80 blocks within 80, 90 blocks west, again, just like you would be east, but on this side, kind of just like West Slope, Raleigh Hills, and Garden Home, inside of here in this zone here, it's going to be a pretty similar feel where more residential, more suburban feeling. But at least if we use the east side boundary as a measure, applying it to the west side, I mean, you're pretty darn close to the city. Again, you do have to contend with getting up and over the hill. So if you live in these areas, out Skyline Boulevard, Miller Road, if you're up here on the West Hills on the backside, on the west side of the West Hills, you're probably going over Burnside to get into the city or Cornell Road. It kind of winds through. Beautiful drive, driving through Forest Park, but it can be slower. Traffic can back up. It's a little less convenient. So even though you're an equal distance on the west side, you definitely can tack on 5, sometimes 10 minutes getting into the city compared to being out here on the boundary on the east side. Uh, Again, we talked a little bit about on the north side. So, you have like the airport and industrial stuff, and then St. John's is kind of the, exception on the north side. On the south side, this Selwood Moreland area is kind of a similar situation as St. John's, where Selwood Moreland has like this little kind of downtown neighborhood area, really popular, really cool historic homes, tree-lined streets. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful neighborhood. But if you apply, the same boundary going in every direction to the south, it actually cuts off kind of right in the middle of Selwood Moreland. Now, again, this is the close in feeling boundary. So if you live down here, you feel like you're in kind of an urban residential environment because you are still with great access getting up into the city, but you're actually, say if it's 80 blocks, 80, 90 blocks south, you're just outside of that boundary. So similar to St. John's, I have had a lot of clients that say they want to be close into the city and they want a cool, walkable neighborhood with character and culture, where you can get that in St. John's for sure, but it's a little bit further north. You definitely get that in Selwood too, but I've had people say that it's just a little too removed. It's just a little too far south for their liking, for whatever reason. So, and that's kind of illustrated by, well, yeah, it actually is, if you're using that 80, 90 block boundary as kind of the measure, it is a little bit further south in that way. And then same here in Southwest Portland on the west side. I put this little area down here south of our true boundary because all through here you're close to Multnomah Village, which is a really cool, walkable, old, historic neighborhood in here. And if you're down here just south of what would be 80 or 90 blocks south, um, you're still in an area where you're feeling like you're getting that type of experience, I think. So I know that's a fair amount of rambling on kind of an arbitrary thing, but honestly, we do get asked about this quite a bit. Depending on the environment that somebody's looking to be in, we want to be able to guide people, provide the guidance on where they should be focusing their attention and why. And again, there's a couple different perspectives on how to look at this in terms of what you can get, in particular for that like kind of close in quote unquote feel where you could be, technically close in, but not feel like you're in kind of a Portland neighborhood. Or, you could push the boundaries a little bit north and south get the experience you're looking for, but actually be a little bit more removed from the city center. So obviously, it just comes down to what somebody's looking for. So if you're thinking about moving to Portland, and if you want to talk about neighborhoods in Portland, some of the differences, what areas are going to suit you best. I love looking at maps with people and kind of walking people through this. So this is something that we do a lot with people, like over a Zoom call. I like to draw on maps and send them to and email them to people. So if that's something you feel like would be helpful for you, and if you want to talk more about it, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk all about it. If this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.